The wind screamed against the jagged cliffs, tearing at Aaliyah Finch's dark dress. It was almost night, and the gray light matched the emptiness in her heart. Below her, the ocean crashed against the black rocks, sounding like thunder. It looked cold, but to Aaliyah it looked like peace. She took a shaky breath. Tears froze on her cheeks. Just yesterday she had a home and a family. Now she had nothing. The lies had spread too fast, whispers that she was a thief and a liar. Her own father had closed the door in her face. The Society of London, the Ton, had decided she was worthless. They hunted her with their cruel words until she felt she had nowhere left to hide. "There is no place for me," she whispered into the gale. She stared down at the swirling white foam. One step, that was all it would take to stop the pain. She closed her eyes and leaned forward, ready to let the wind take her. Suddenly, a rough hand clamped around her wrist. It yanked her back with bruising force. Aaliyah gasped and spun around, losing her footing. She didn't fall into the sea, though. She fell against a hard chest. She looked up, terrified. It was not a ghost. It was Rhys Andrews, the Duke of Blackwood. He did not look like the polished gentleman she was used to. His coat was worn, his hair was wild from the wind, and his eyes were blazing with a terrifying fire. He didn't look like a savior. He looked like a storm. "Let me go," Aaliyah sobbed, struggling against his grip. "You don't understand. I have to go." "You are going nowhere," Rhys growled. His voice was deep and rough, cutting through the sound of the wind. He held her tight, his hands gripping her arms, as if he was afraid she would vanish if he let go. Aaliyah collapsed, her strength leaving her legs. "Please," she cried, her voice breaking. "There is nothing left. Everyone hates me. The whole world wants me dead." The Duke went still. The anger in his eyes shifted into something darker, something dangerous and fiercely protective. He pulled her closer, shielding her shivering body from the cold wind with his own. He looked out at the horizon, then down into her tear-filled eyes. "Then I will burn the world," he vowed, his voice low and steady. "If they want you dead, Aaliyah, I will destroy them all before I let them touch you." Only days before Rhys caught her on the cliff, Aaliyah had stood in the center of her father's study, trembling not from cold, but from shock. The room smelled of beeswax and pipe smoke, a scent that used to make her feel safe. Now it felt like a prison. Her father, Lord Finch, stood behind his heavy oak desk. His face was purple with rage. On the desk lay a pile of crumpled letters and a small velvet pouch. "I will not hear another word of your lies," her father shouted, his voice shaking the walls. "The evidence is right here, Aaliyah. The jewelry was found in your room. The letters were in your handwriting." "It wasn't me," Aaliyah pleaded, tears streaming down her face. She reached out toward her mother, who sat in the corner chair. "Mother, please, you know I would never steal. You know I never wrote those things to that man. Someone put them there." Her mother did not look up. She stared at her embroidery, her needle moving in sharp, angry jerks. The silence from the woman who had raised her was a sharper knife than any insult. "You have disgraced this family," her father continued, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "Your engagement is broken. Thomas wants nothing to do with a thief and a cheater. Do you know what the Ton is calling you? A pariah, a stain." Aaliyah sobbed, her chest heaving. "Papa, please." "Do not call me that," he snapped. He pointed a shaking finger toward the front door. "You are no daughter of mine. I will not have my reputation destroyed because of your wickedness. You will leave this house tonight." "Leave?" Aaliyah whispered. "But where will I go?" "I do not care," he said coldly. "Go to the streets. Go to the workhouse. Just get out of my sight before you ruin your sister's future, too." The servants were watching as she was ushered to the heavy front door. They didn't offer to help. They looked at her with wide, judgmental eyes, already believing the gossip. The heavy wooden door slammed shut behind her with a sound like a gunshot. Aaliyah stood on the stone steps, listening to the lock turn. It was the sound of her life ending. She walked into the dark London streets with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart shattered by the people who were supposed to love her. That was the moment the darkness had taken over. For 2 days she wandered, invisible and unwanted, until she found herself walking toward the cliffs, believing her father was right. She was a stain, and the ocean was the only thing that could wash her away. Rhys didn't wait for Aaliyah to answer his vow. Before the words of his dark promise had even faded into the wind, he swept her up into his arms. Aaliyah gasped, her feet leaving the dangerous, slippery grass. She felt small and fragile against his broad chest, like a bird with a broken wing. "Put me down," she cried, her voice weak and scratchy from screaming. "You don't understand. I am ruined. You cannot be seen with me." "I do not care what I am seen with," Rhys muttered, his jaw tight. He turned his back on the cliff and the churning sea, marching toward the muddy road where a black carriage waited in the shadows. Aaliyah tried to push against his shoulders, but her hands were frozen and shaking. She had no fight left. She had barely eaten or slept since her father threw her out. Her head spun. "Why?" she sobbed, burying her face in his rough coat. "Why didn't you let me fall? It would be easier." Rhys didn't answer until they reached the carriage. The horses stomped nervously in the mud, their breath puffing out in white clouds. A driver in a dark coat opened the door, keeping his eyes low. Rhys climbed in, settling Aaliyah onto the velvet seat before sitting across from her. The heavy door slammed shut, cutting off the sound of the wind instantly. The silence inside was heavy. Aaliyah shivered violently, her teeth chattering. Rhys reached over and grabbed a thick fur blanket, wrapping it around her trembling shoulders. His hands were rough, but his touch was surprisingly gentle. He adjusted the fur until she was completely covered. "You ask why," Rhys said, his voice filling the small space. He wasn't looking at her. He was staring out the window at the darkening sky. "I was at the ball, Aaliyah, the night they accused you." Aaliyah froze. Her face burned with shame. "You saw?" "I saw everything," he growled. He turned his burning gaze back to her. "I watched them circle you like wolves. I watched your friends turn their backs. I watched your father cast you out without a second thought. I saw the look in your eyes." "Then you know what they say is true," she whispered, looking down at her hands. "I am a disgrace." "I know they are liars," Rhys snapped. The anger in his voice made her jump, but she realized it wasn't directed at her. "I have watched this society destroy good people for sport for years. I stayed away from London because I despised them, but watching them break you—" He shook his head slowly, his eyes dark with an old anger. "That was a cruelty I could not ignore. I will not let the wolves win this time." He banged his fist on the roof of the carriage, signaling the driver. As the carriage lurched forward, taking her away from the edge of death, Aaliyah realized she wasn't just being saved, she was being taken by a man who hated the world just as much as she did. The carriage finally slowed, the wheels crunching over loose gravel. Aaliyah peered through the dark window. She expected to see another fancy estate like the ones in London, with manicured gardens and bright lights. Instead, she saw a shadow that blotted out the stars. Blackwood Manor rose from the earth like a beast. It was made of dark, heavy stone, with tall towers that looked like they were guarding secrets. There were no colorful flower beds, only thick forests and high iron gates. It looked lonely. It looked exactly like the Duke who owned it. "We are here," Reese said, opening the carriage door. The cold air rushed in, but the house promised warmth. Aaliyah didn't move. She looked down at her dress. The hem was soaked with mud from the cliff. Her shoes were ruined. But the dirt on her clothes felt like nothing compared to the stain on her name. She was a woman cast out by her own father. She was a pariah. "I cannot go in there," she whispered, her voice trembling. Reese reached out a hand, waiting. "And why not?" "Look at me," she choked out. "I am ruined, Reese. I am dirty. I will stain your home. A place like this, it is for honorable people, not for someone like me." Reese made a rough sound in his throat. He reached in and took her hand, his grip firm. "This is not a palace for the polite society, Aaliyah. It is a fortress. It was built to keep storms out, not to judge the people seeking shelter inside." He didn't give her time to argue. He helped her down from the carriage. Her legs felt like jelly, but he kept her steady. As they walked toward the massive wooden front doors, Aaliyah felt a heavy weight in her chest. She wanted the safety he offered, but she felt like a thief stealing it. She didn't deserve his kindness. She didn't deserve to be saved. The heavy doors creaked open, revealing a grand entrance hall. It was dim, lit only by a roaring fire in a stone hearth big enough to stand in. Shadows danced on the walls. It wasn't bright and cheerful, but it felt solid. It felt unbreakable. "You are safe here," Reese said, closing the heavy doors behind them and locking out the night. "No one enters Blackwood unless I allow it. The world that hurt you cannot reach you here." Aaliyah stood on the stone floor, shivering as the warmth of the fire hit her skin. For the first time in days, she wasn't cold, but the feeling of unworthiness twisted in her stomach. She was safe, yes, but she feared that eventually, even this dark fortress wouldn't be enough to hide her shame. The fire in the great hall crackled, casting long, dancing shadows against the stone walls. Aaliyah sat in a high-backed chair, wrapped in the fur blanket, but her hands were still shaking. She watched Reese pace back and forth in front of the hearth. He looked like a caged tiger, restless and dangerous. "You cannot stay here as a guest, Aaliyah," Reese said suddenly, stopping to look at her. "Society will find out. Your father will come. They will drag you back to London and throw you into a workhouse or worse." Aaliyah lowered her head. "I know. That is why I must leave. I cannot bring that trouble to your doorstep." "I am not telling you to leave," Reese said, his voice hard. "I am telling you that being a guest is not enough protection. You need a shield that they cannot break." He took a step closer, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "Marry me." Aaliyah stopped breathing. The only sound was the popping of the firewood. She stared at him, sure she had misunderstood. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated, his tone flat and serious. "This will not be a marriage of love, Aaliyah. It will be a marriage of war. If you become the Duchess of Blackwood, you become untouchable. No one, not even your father, can touch a duchess. My title is old and powerful. It is the only armor strong enough to save you." "No!" Aaliyah gasped, standing up so fast the blanket fell to the floor. "I cannot do that to you, Reese. Do you not understand? I am ruined. The whole world thinks I am a liar and a thief. If you marry me, that mud will splash onto you. I will ruin your name forever." "My name?" Reese laughed, but it was a bitter, sharp sound. "You think I care about my name? You think I care about the whispers of people I despise?" "You should," Aaliyah argued, tears pricking her eyes again. "You are a duke. You have honor. I am nothing now. I will drag you down into the dirt with me." Reese crossed the space between them in 2 long strides. He grabbed her shoulders, his grip firm but not painful. He forced her to look at him. "Listen to me,"
he commanded. "My name is just a word. My title is just a tool. I do not care if they whisper about me. I do not care if they turn their backs on me. I only care that you are alive." He leaned closer, his intensity burning through her fear. "Let them talk. Let them hate us. But as long as you wear my ring, they cannot hurt you. I would trade my reputation for your life every single day. Now will you fight with me, or will you let them win?" Aaliyah looked into his fierce, determined face. She saw no hesitation, only a promise of safety. For the first time, she realized he wasn't offering to save her reputation. He was offering to sacrifice his own to save her life. The days at Blackwood Manor passed slowly, like a quiet dream. The storm that raged outside the heavy stone walls never reached the inside. For the first time in weeks, Aaliyah felt warm, but she was still very weak. The walk to the cliff and the shock of her family's betrayal had drained her spirit. One evening, the maids prepared a warm bath for her in front of the fireplace in her room. The steam rose up, smelling of lavender and honey. Aaliyah sat in the copper tub, the water soothing her aching bones. She tried to lift the heavy pitcher to rinse her hair, but her arms trembled. She was just too tired. She let the pitcher slide back down with a splash. A knock came at the door, and Reese entered. He wasn't wearing his heavy coat, just a simple white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing strong arms scarred from work. He saw her struggle and didn't say a word. He didn't call for a maid. Instead, he walked over and knelt beside the tub. "Let me," he said softly. Aaliyah tensed. "You shouldn't. It is not a job for a duke." "I told you," Reese murmured, taking a cup of warm water. "I do not care about titles." He told her to lean back. Aaliyah closed her eyes and obeyed. She expected him to be rough. Everything about Reese Andrews was sharp and hard, like the cliffs he lived on. But when his fingers touched her scalp, they were incredibly gentle. He poured the water over her hair, careful not to get any in her eyes. He massaged the soap in slowly, washing away the dirt of the road and the salt of the sea. His large hands, which looked like they could crush stone, treated her as if she were made of glass. Aaliyah opened her eyes and looked up at him. His face was serious, focused entirely on the task. The anger that usually burned in his eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet kindness. She realized then that the world was wrong about him. They called him a beast, a recluse, a savage. But a beast could not be this gentle. "You are good to me, Reese," she whispered. "Better than I deserve." "I deserve peace, Aaliyah," he replied, wrapping her wet hair in a soft towel. "Nothing less." Later, after she was dressed in a clean, dry gown, she sat by the fire. Reese sat in the chair opposite her, a thick book in his hands. He read aloud to her, his deep voice filling the silence of the room. He didn't read stories of wars or battles, but old legends of stars and travelers finding their way home. As Aaliyah watched the firelight dance across his face, the knot of fear in her chest began to loosen. She wasn't just safe because of his walls or his title. She was safe because of him. Beneath the rugged armor of the Duke, she had found a man with a heart. And for the first time since the scandal, she thought that maybe, just maybe, she could heal.
The peace at Blackwood Manor was fragile, like thin ice over a deep river. For a few weeks, Aaliyah had started to believe the ice would hold. She had color in her cheeks again, and the nightmares didn't come every single night. But the world outside had not forgotten her. It happened on a rainy Tuesday morning. Aaliyah was sitting in the parlor, watching the rain streak against the glass, when the butler entered. He held a silver tray, and on it sat a single, thick envelope. "A letter for you, Your Grace," he said quietly. Aaliyah's heart stopped. No one knew she was here except Reese and the servants. She reached out with a trembling hand, The wax seal on the back was red, the color of blood. It was the seal of the London High Court. She broke the seal and unfolded the heavy paper. The words swam before her eyes. Summons. Accused of grand theft. Lord Finch demands justice. The paper slipped from her numb fingers and fluttered to the floor. The air in the room seemed to vanish. They hadn't just cast her out. They were coming for her. They wanted to put her in prison. They wanted to destroy the little bit of life she had left. Aaliyah. Reese stood in the doorway. He saw the paper on the floor and the look of absolute terror on her face. In 2 strides, he was at her side. He picked up the letter and read it. His face didn't show fear. It turned into a mask of cold, hard stone. "I have to leave," Aaliyah gasped, standing up. She felt dizzy. "I have to run away. If they find me here, they will drag your name through the mud, too. I can go to France. I can go somewhere they will never find me." "Stop," Reese said. His voice wasn't loud, but it stopped her dead in her tracks. "Please, Reese," she cried, gripping his arm. "My father won't stop. He wants to see me ruined. We have to hide." Reese crumpled the letter in his fist. He looked down at her, and the fire was back in his eyes, the same fire from the cliff. But this time, it wasn't just protective. It was a declaration of war. "We are done hiding," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Hiding makes you look guilty. Running makes you look weak. You are the Duchess of Blackwood now. You do not run from anyone." He walked to the fireplace and threw the crumpled summons into the flames. They watched the paper turn to ash. "Pack your things, Aaliyah," Reese commanded, turning back to her. "We are not going to France. We are going to London." Aaliyah stared at him, her eyes wide. "London? But that is where they are." "Exactly," Reese said, a dark, terrifying smile touching his lips. "They summoned a scared girl to court, but they are going to get a duke and his duchess instead. We are going to London to end this, once and for all."
The carriage stopped outside the brightly lit mansion. The sound of string music and laughter drifted out into the street, but to Aaliyah it sounded like a warning. This was Lady Winthrop's annual ball, the heart of London society. It was the exact place where the rumors had started, and tonight it felt like entering a lion's den. Reese helped her down from the carriage. He wore formal black evening wear, looking more like a king of shadows than a party guest. Aaliyah wore a gown of deep midnight blue, dark enough to match the storm in Reese's eyes. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "I can't breathe," she whispered, her hand trembling on his arm as they climbed the wide marble steps. "You breathe because I am here," Reese said, his voice low in her ear. "Remember, you are above them now. Look at no one but me if you must." They reached the top of the stairs. The footman at the door looked at them, his eyes widening in shock. He hesitated, looking from the scarred, terrifying Duke to the woman everyone said was ruined. He cleared his throat nervously and shouted over the noise of the violins. "His Grace the Duke of Blackwood, and Her Grace the Duchess of Blackwood." The effect was instant. The music faltered and died. The laughter stopped. Hundreds of heads turned toward the grand doorway. The silence was sudden and heavy, pressing down on Aaliyah's shoulders like a physical weight. Then the whispers began. It sounded like a nest of vipers waking up, hissing, buzzing. Aaliyah could feel their eyes crawling over her skin. She saw her former friends covering their mouths with fans to hide their cruel smiles. She saw the men who had once courted her, now looking at her with disgust. She saw her father across the room, his face going pale as a ghost. "The thief," they whispered, "the outcast. How dare she show her face?" Her knees knocked together. The urge to turn and run back into the dark, safe night was overwhelming.
She started to pull her hand away, ready to flee before they could hurt her again. But Rhys's grip was iron. He didn't let her go. He didn't even flinch. He squeezed her hand, painful and grounding, anchoring her to the spot. He looked out at the sea of shocked faces with a look of pure, cold boredom. He didn't look like a man entering a party. He looked like a predator entering a pen of sheep. "Walk," he commanded softly. They stepped onto the ballroom floor. The crowd parted for them, not out of respect, but out of fear. Rhys walked with long, steady strides, forcing Aaliyah to match his pace. He stared down anyone who dared to make eye contact, daring them to speak up. Under his protection, Aaliyah lifted her chin just an inch. The vipers were still hissing, but the lion was walking beside her, and for the first time, the crowd looked afraid of getting bitten.
The silence in the ballroom did not last long. Just as Aaliyah and Rhys reached the center of the floor, a voice boomed across the room. "How dare you bring that woman here?" Lord Finch, Aaliyah's father, pushed through the crowd. His face was purple with rage. Beside him stood Thomas, Aaliyah's former fiancé, looking smug and cruel. The crowd gasped and stepped back, leaving a wide circle around them. "She is a thief and a liar," Lord Finch shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Aaliyah. "She has no place among decent people. Get her out of my sight before she steals the silver." Aaliyah flinched, burying her face in Rhys's sleeve. The old shame rose up in her throat, choking her. But then Rhys laughed. It was a cold, dark sound that echoed off the high ceiling. "A thief?" Rhys asked, his voice calm but deadly. "That is an interesting accusation, Lord Finch, especially coming from a man who lost his family fortune at the gambling tables 3 months ago." Lord Finch froze. "That is a lie." "Is it?" Rhys reached into his coat and pulled out a stack of papers. He held them up for the room to see. "I have here the records from the gaming hall, and here," he pulled out a second document, "is the receipt from the pawn shop where you sold your late wife's jewelry, the very jewelry you accused your daughter of stealing." The room erupted in whispers. Lord Finch turned pale, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "You framed your own child to cover your debts. You destroyed her life to save your own reputation." Rhys then turned his burning gaze to Thomas. The young man tried to back away, but the crowd blocked him. "And you," Rhys sneered, "you wrote the fake love letters found in her room. You helped frame her so you could break your engagement without returning her dowry. I have the confession from the maid you bribed to plant them." Thomas looked around wildly, but the eyes of the Ton had changed. They were no longer looking at Aaliyah with disgust. They were looking at Lord Finch and Thomas with absolute horror. "You wanted to destroy her name," Rhys said, stepping closer to the two trembling men. "You wanted to make her a pariah. Well, congratulations, you have succeeded in making someone an outcast tonight." Rhys tore the papers in half and let the pieces fall to the floor like snow. "London society does not forgive liars, and it certainly does not forgive men who hide behind the skirts of innocent women. You are finished." Lady Wenthrop, the hostess, stepped forward, her face hard. She gestured to the footman. "Escort Lord Finch and Mr. Thomas out," she commanded. "They are not welcome in my home." As the footman dragged the sputtering villains away, the crowd parted again, but this time they bowed their heads to Aaliyah. Rhys looked down at her, his eyes fierce and triumphant. He had kept his promise. He had burned her enemies to the ground, and she was the only one left standing in the ashes. The sun rose over the jagged cliffs, painting the gray sky in soft shades of pink and gold. It was the exact same spot where Aaliyah had stood weeks ago, desperate and broken.
But in the morning light, the ocean didn't look like a dark grave. It glittered like thousands of diamonds. The wind wasn't screaming anymore. It was singing. Aaliyah stood near the edge, her hair blowing gently around her face. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the sharp, salty air. She wasn't standing there to jump. She was standing there to feel the earth beneath her feet. Soft footsteps crunched on the grass behind her. Aaliyah didn't flinch. She didn't gasp or spin around in terror. She knew exactly who it was. "You are close to the edge," Reese said quietly. Aaliyah turned to face him. "I am not afraid of falling anymore." Reese stood a few feet away, his hands in his pockets. In the bright morning sun, the harsh lines of his face seemed softer. The terrifying fire that had burned in his eyes at the ballroom was gone, replaced by a warm, steady light. He looked at her not as a victim to be saved, but as a woman he admired. "Is it done?" Aaliyah asked softly. Reese nodded once. "It is done. The lies are exposed. Your father and Thomas are ruined. The society that hunted you is now too afraid to speak your name in anything but a whisper." He took a step closer. "I told you I would burn their world for you." Aaliyah reached out and took his large, scarred hand in hers. "You did," she whispered, "but you did something more important, Reese. You built a new world for me." She looked back at the horizon, where the sun was breaking free from the water, chasing away the last shadows of the night. "That night on the cliff, I wanted the silence," she confessed, squeezing his hand. "I wanted the pain to stop. But today, I want to see tomorrow. I want to be the Duchess of Blackwood. I want to live." Reese pulled her into his arms, wrapping her in the same protective warmth that had saved her life. "Then live with me, Aaliyah, forever." He leaned down, and their lips met. It wasn't a desperate kiss, and it wasn't for show. It was a promise. Behind them, the waves crashed against the eternal rocks, witnessing the start of a life that had been snatched from the jaws of death. The storm was over. The sun had finally risen.